Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a peaceful California farmer crosses paths with an overzealous HOA queen, strawberries turn to scandal. What starts as a whiff of fruit becomes a full-blown turf war, complete with trespassing, stolen berries, and two very loyal dogs. Welcome to the juiciest showdown this side of the fence. My name's Dan Rivers. I'm 43, proud owner of a 90-acre berry farm in Northern California, and I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble. I prefer early mornings with dew on the fields, the hum of bees over blooming rows of strawberries and blackberries, and the satisfaction that comes from honest work. My farm's been in the family for generations, passed down from my grandfather, who built this place with his bare hands and one rusty tractor. Over the years, I've expanded the operation, planted blueberries, upgraded irrigation, got a distribution deal with a few high-end restaurants in San Francisco, and even started selling direct to local markets. It's not just a job, it's a life. The land's zoned agricultural and fully licensed, fenced off properly, and protected by clear, no trespassing signs every 50 feet, because people have a funny way of forgetting boundaries when they see open space and ripe fruit. I've got insurance, surveillance cameras, motion lights, and most importantly, two trained dogs, Brute, a massive Rottweiler with the patience of a monk and the instincts of a war general, and Tank, a German Shepherd who can hear a rabbit blink at 50 yards. They're not just security, they're family. They know this land like I do, and they don't like uninvited guests. For the most part, my neighbors keep their distance. The property borders a residential subdivision, Maple Heights, managed by one of those over-polished, rule-obsessed HOAs. They've got pastel houses, decorative mailboxes, and lawn committees. Our paths don't cross much. I keep to my berries, they keep to their barbecues. Until, of course, Karen Wallace showed up. She moved in 3 months ago and was appointed HOA president before the boxes were even unpacked. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, crisp tennis skirts like a uniform. You know the type. One day, she showed up at my gate unannounced, smiling like we were best friends. Said she just wanted to build community. I figured she'd move on after a polite chat, but I should have known better. Karen wasn't here to build anything. She was here to claim. And my farm, that was her next project. It started with a letter, of all things, a pale pink envelope with cursive handwriting dropped into my mailbox like it was an invitation to a bake sale. Inside was a note, unsigned but unmistakably Karen-esque, complaining about the overpowering aroma of fruit wafting into neighboring homes and suggesting I consider reducing berry production or using scent-dampening techniques for the sake of the community. I nearly choked on my coffee. Who complains about the smell of strawberries? I crumpled it up and tossed it without a second thought, figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, as I was out pruning blackberry vines near the western field, I saw her again. Karen standing just outside the fence in her pastel athleisure wear, arms folded, lips pursed like she was sucking on a lemon. She didn't even wave, just called out, "Dan, we need to talk." I stood up straight, wiped my gloves on my jeans, and leaned on the fence. "What's the issue today, Karen?" She gestured broadly toward the rows behind me. "This whole operation, it's excessive. The smell of berries is overwhelming, especially in the evenings. And the children, they're constantly asking why they can't pick fruit from the fields they see every day." I blinked. "Because it's private property, and this operation is how I pay my mortgage." Karen gave a condescending smile like I was a misbehaving child. "Dan, surely you can set aside a portion of the crops for the neighborhood. A little berry stand, some sort of community harvest weekend. People are feeling excluded." "I run a commercial farm, not a petting zoo." She bristled. "It's about being neighborly." "No," I said, my voice flat. "It's about boundaries. Literal ones, which your HOA already seems to misunderstand." She sighed, like she pitied me. "I just think you're missing an opportunity to bring people together. And frankly, the HOA is starting to discuss how your presence affects property values. Exclusivity doesn't foster goodwill." I didn't even respond to that one. Just turned and walked back to work. Her voice followed me. "This isn't over, Dan. This community deserves better." I didn't say it out loud, but I sure as hell thought it. So does this farm. I told myself it was just talk, empty posturing. But in my gut, I knew better. People like Karen don't knock once and walk away. They circle. They wait. and then they try to take. It was a Tuesday morning, early just after sunrise, with the sky still painted in that soft lavender haze you only get in the country. I was halfway through loading crates into the cooler when I heard the familiar ping of my phone. Motion alert, Southern Field. I glanced at the screen and frowned. There, on the live feed, were 4 figures sneaking through the tree line like teenagers trying to skip church. But these weren't kids. I recognized the lead right away. Karen, in a wide-brimmed sun hat and floral gloves, flanked by 3 of her HOA disciples. Each carried tote bags and plastic buckets like they were headed to a pick-your-own farm. One even had garden shears swinging from her hip like a trophy. They'd broken the padlock on the south gate, bent the wire fence flat underfoot, and now they were walking straight into the most productive section of the property, the lower strawberry fields, where the berries were full, red, and ready for harvest. I stood frozen for a second, not out of fear, just raw disbelief. Who the hell wakes up and decides that stealing crops off someone's private farm is justified community service? I dropped the box in my hands and headed for the UTV parked by the shed. As I fired it up, my phone buzzed again. This time, a clearer shot of Karen turning to the others and whispering, "Quickly now, before he notices. Let's fill the bags and go." It's not like he's going to miss a few. By the time I pulled up to the edge of the field, they were already deep in the rows, kneeling, laughing, tossing berries into bags with the casual arrogance of people who believe rules are optional when they don't serve them. One of the women took out her phone and started taking selfies, strawberries in hand. I sat there for a second in the idling UTV, watching them. It wasn't just the trespassing, it wasn't just the damage to my fence or the theft of my crop. It was the entitlement. The sheer, smug belief that they had a right to what I'd spent months cultivating because they could see it from their backyard. Well, they weren't the only ones watching that morning. Brute and Tank had already picked up the scent, and when those 2 hit the field, things were about to get a whole lot louder. I didn't need to say a word. The moment Brute's ears perked and his nose twitched, I knew he was already locked on. Tank wasn't far behind. They moved like shadows, low, fast, disciplined. No barking at first, no dramatic charge. These dogs were trained to patrol, not to perform, and they'd sensed intruders. By the time I stepped out of the UTV and whistled once, sharp and short, both of them were in the field. That was when the chorus started, screaming. Not the blood-curdling kind, but the high-pitched, suburban HOA variety shrieks of women suddenly realizing they weren't the apex predators they'd imagined. Karen's hat went flying as she stumbled backward into a row of raspberries. One of the women dropped her entire bucket and ran for the fence, tripping on a sprinkler line. The third just froze, eyes wide, hands up like the dogs were federal agents. Brute planted himself between the group and the nearest berry row, his bark deep and sharp, one of those chest-thudding warnings that make your spine lock up. Tank paced in a wide semicircle, flanking them. He didn't growl, didn't even show teeth. He just stared, tail low and steady, like a soldier waiting for orders. Karen shrieked, "Call them off! Call them off! We're being attacked!" I walked in slowly, arms crossed, boots crunching over fallen fruit and broken stems. "Attacked?" I said, deadpan. "You mean my dogs guarding my land from a pack of trespassers?" One of the women waved her hand toward Brute, who was now sitting, still, watching. That one tried to bite me. I glanced at her sleeve, torn barely. She'd swung a little garden trowel at him, probably out of panic, and Brute had reacted with precision, snapping at her arm not to maul, but to say, "Back off." She'd dropped the trowel and half her dignity in the process. Karen stepped forward, trembling with rage. "We just wanted a few berries. You don't own nature." I let out a dry laugh. "You broke through a locked gate, walked past multiple no trespassing signs, stole produce, and provoked trained guard dogs. Lady, you're lucky you didn't end up with more than a scuffed elbow and a bruised ego." She started to say something else, probably about community or children, but I raised my phone. The live feed from the surveillance cameras was still running. Crystal clear footage of them cutting through the fence, bagging berries, laughing about it. Brute stood up again, sensing the tension rise. Karen flinched. I held up a hand to him and whistled twice. Both dogs fell back, obedient, sitting behind me like sentries. "They're not here to bite you," I said, "but they are here to stop you. And they just did their job better than any HOA board you'll ever sit on." That shut her up, temporarily. But I knew this wasn't over, not with Karen. People like her don't take responsibility. They find someone to blame. So I called the police, right there in front of them, because this time I wanted everything on record. The deputies arrived in under 15 minutes. That's the one upside of living near a town small enough where everyone knows you, but just big enough to have a decently funded sheriff's office. 2 patrol cars rolled up the gravel path, lights off, but attitude on. I recognized the first deputy before he even stepped out. Deputy Holloway, square jaw, mirrored shades, the kind of guy who drinks his coffee black and never misses Sunday service. He took one look at the scene, Karen and her crew standing awkwardly among the trampled berry rows, dogs seated like statues at my side, and me with a phone in one hand and bolt cutters dangling from Karen's tote bag, and let out a long sigh. "Mr. Rivers," he greeted, walking up. "Morning. Want to tell me what we're dealing with?" I didn't even have to. I just turned the screen toward him and hit play. Clear as day, the gate being pried open with a screwdriver, Karen leading the charge with her sun hat bouncing, a chorus of laughter and casual berry plucking. No panic, no confusion, just blatant trespassing and theft. When the part with the dogs played, one of the women gasped again, more for effect than anything. But the footage showed it all plainly. Dogs barking, not attacking. No lunges, no bites. Just a torn sleeve caused when she raised a tool at Brute. Even Holloway raised a brow at that. He nodded, then turned to Karen, who by this point had completely ditched the high and mighty persona and looked like a damp squirrel. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "did you break through that fence?" It was already loose," she stammered. "We have video of you cutting it." She puffed up. "We just wanted a few berries. You can't sick dogs on people for picking strawberries. You weren't picking wildflowers, ma'am. This is a commercial farm, private property, clearly marked. And those dogs, they didn't touch you. They responded to a security breach, which you caused." Her mouth flapped a bit before she found something to cling to. "Well, what about him? He called them on us like they were weapons." I stepped in, voice calm. "They're trained for patrol. I gave them a whistle command, same one I use when deer jump the fence. They don't attack unless I give a different signal. And I didn't." One of the other women whined. "I scratched my leg on a branch while running." "That counts as assault." Holloway ignored her and looked back at me. "Do you want to press charges, Dan?" I nodded. "Absolutely. I've got damages. I've got video. And I've got a long season ahead. I don't need more stunts like this." "Understood," he said, then turned to his partner. "Take statements. I'll call this in." Karen let out a gasp like she'd been slapped. "You're arresting us." "For berries?" "No, ma'am," Holloway said. "For criminal trespass, destruction of property, and attempted theft. The berries just made it easier to prove." She muttered something about her husband being a lawyer. I muttered something about not caring. As they were led back toward the cruisers, one of the women looked over her shoulder and hissed, "This isn't the end." She was right, but not the way she thought. By the next morning, word had spread through Maple Heights faster than a brush fire in July. I didn't need to scroll Facebook or check Nextdoor to know it. People were slowing down as they drove past my gate, some out of curiosity, others out of embarrassment. Karen's HOA empire had cracked, and everyone smelled smoke. Around noon, I got a call from one of the few reasonable folks on the HOA board, Linda Perez, the treasurer. She sounded like someone who'd just found out their vacation home was built on a sinkhole. "Dan," she began, voice stiff, "I want to make it clear that what happened yesterday was not sanctioned by the HOA." "I figured," I said flatly. She hesitated, then continued, "There's going to be an emergency board meeting tonight. I would strongly suggest you attend." I didn't want to, but I also knew Karen would be there, and if there was going to be fallout, I wanted front row seats. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse, a beige little building that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated fun. The room was packed, residents shoulder to shoulder, HOA board seated up front like it was a trial and they were the jury. Karen was there too, sunglasses on indoors, shoulders stiff with manufactured dignity. It didn't last long. The moment the president's gavel hit the table, Linda stood and cleared her throat. "We need to address the incident involving Mrs. Wallace and several other members who trespassed on Mr. D. Rivers' property yesterday." There were murmurs, whispers. Someone even gasped for dramatic effect. Karen stood up. "That land borders our community, and he's been hoarding produce while we—" "Karen," Linda cut in, voice cool as steel, You broke into a working farm. You were caught on camera. You are currently facing criminal charges." Silence. The board voted unanimously to suspend her indefinitely and publicly state that the HOA would not be covering her legal defense. Karen looked like she'd swallowed her own tongue. "I didn't speak at the meeting. I didn't need to." The look on every board member's face said it all. "What the hell were you thinking, Karen?" She didn't answer them then, but her silence spoke volumes. By the time the court date rolled around, Karen had traded her tennis skirts and smug grin for a wrinkled beige pantsuit and a look that said she hadn't slept in a month. I, on the other hand, showed up in clean work jeans, a button-down, and boots polished just enough to pass for a respectable rural entrepreneur. My attorney, Melissa Quinn, was a small but terrifying woman who once took on a water rights case against the state and won. She didn't believe in pleasantries or wasted motions. She believed in evidence, and we had a truckload. Melissa had compiled everything: the camera footage, GPS-tagged timestamps, damage estimates, photos of the broken fence, statements from the officers, veterinary records proving Brute and Tank were trained non-aggressive security dogs, and even copies of the HOA bylaws, which explicitly forbade board members from engaging in unsanctioned activity representing the association. That last bit was the cherry on top. Karen, of course, had lawyered up. Her husband, or more accurately, her soon-to-be ex-husband. Rumor was he'd moved into a hotel after the HOA scandal exploded. He looked tired, disinterested, and frankly embarrassed to be there. Court started with the usual formalities, but the judge, an older man named Whitaker with bushy eyebrows and a dry sense of humor, cut through the fluff quickly. "Mr. Rivers," he said, "would you like to summarize your complaint?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. On the morning of June 14th, the defendants broke through my fence, entered my commercial farm without permission, attempted to harvest produce, and were stopped by my trained security dogs. The dogs did not harm anyone. The intruders caused property damage, interfered with my business, and then falsely accused me of endangerment." Melissa stood beside me, barely suppressing a grin. Karen's lawyer tried the usual song and dance. Misunderstanding, harmless intentions, no real theft occurred, a sense of public good. But Judge Whitaker was having none of it. "So let me get this straight," he said, leaning forward. "You believe that because Mr. Rivers' strawberries were visible from your backyards, they were community property?" Karen herself blurted. "Not property, Your Honor. Resources. He hoards them. They could feed children. That did it." Whitaker sat back in his chair. "Ma'am, you do not have the right to reclassify private agricultural goods as communal resources because they smell nice. You trespassed. You damaged fencing. You harvested produce. That is theft. Plain and simple. The dogs didn't bite you. They did exactly what they were trained to do. And frankly, I wish more farmers were this responsible." Karen's face went red, then purple. The verdict came swiftly. The court found her and her berry bandits liable for criminal trespass, attempted theft, property damage, defamation due to public accusations made post-arrest, emotional distress because I'd received threats after Karen posted distorted versions of the event online. They were ordered to pay restitution for the crop loss, cost of fence repair, additional legal fees, and damages totaling just under $18,000, not to mention the misdemeanor records now attached to all four of them. But the real satisfaction came when Whitaker added one last note. "I suggest you take this as a lesson," he said to Karen directly. "You don't get to rewrite boundaries just because you don't like where the fence is." I didn't smile, not in court. But inside, I was grinning like a fox in a henhouse. Not because I'd won, but because now the whole damn town knew what happens when you try to steal from a farmer, guarded by dogs, cameras, and the Constitution. It's been a few months since the courtroom drama, and life on the farm has settled back into its familiar rhythm. The strawberries are thriving, the blueberries came in fat and sweet this year, and the blackberries, well, they've always had a bit of an attitude, but that's what makes them good. The air is once again filled with the hum of bees, the occasional bark from Brute or Tank, and the satisfying sound of fruit being picked the right way by licensed workers, not entitled HOA commandos with picnic baskets. The new gate I installed, steel reinforced, remote controlled, and flanked by 2 solar-powered cameras. I even added motion-triggered lights along the southern edge, just in case someone else gets creative. But the biggest change, and by far my favorite, is the new sign posted at every entry point to the farm. It reads, Riversberry Farm, private property, no trespassing. All crops protected by canines, cameras, and common sense. And underneath, in smaller print, want berries? Visit the market like everyone else. It's cheaper than court fees and new pants. That one's for you, Karen. Speaking of Her Majesty of Maple Heights, she didn't show her face for a while after the trial. Word is she resigned from the HOA in disgrace, though some claim she was pressured to step down after the board received over 30 complaint letters and one actual petition titled No More Karenism. HOA meetings are a lot quieter now. Linda Perez even brought me a basket of muffins and a handwritten note that read, Thanks for protecting your farm and the rest of us from Karen, Brute, and Tank. They've become local celebrities. A news segment out of Santa Rosa ran the headline, Berry Bandits Foiled by Four-Legged Security. Someone made a meme of Brute sitting in the field with sunglasses photoshopped on and the caption, Not on my watch. I framed it and hung it in the farm office. Every so often, I still catch sight of curious passers-by slowing their cars as they drive by the fence. Some stop to take photos of the sign. Others just stare at the neat rows of berries behind the wire. And occasionally, I hear whispers of a certain ex-HOA queen still complaining to anyone who'll listen that she was unjustly treated by an aggressive farmer and his attack dogs. But out here, under the California sun, with dirt under my nails and honest work ahead of me, I don't have time for nonsense. Because this land is mine, the berries are mine, and the dogs. Yeah, they're still watching.